Hello, and welcome to our Families in Crisis podcast. This is Anne DeSantis, and it's the 10 Saint series, part two. We did a whole series of 10 for part one, and now we're on the second series. And so it's been a real honor to be able to do this podcast with my wonderful co host and the president of our foundation, Mickey Kelly, who will be joining us in just a few short seconds here. Mickey, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast.
Hi, and thank you for having me here. And I'm super excited about our selection for the 10 Saints series. We are talking about the one and only Fulton Sheen.
That's right, the one and only Fulton Sheen, and there is so much to talk about, and I think I wanted to start out almost with his bio because there is so much to unpack. Now, we're never really gonna be able to cover everything about him, but one of those aspects is just where he came from, who he was, and I have a website that I'm pulling up right now. I'm gonna hand it over to you for 1 second, Mickey. Just tell us your own take on Bishop Sheen as we begin this podcast.
Well, Fulton Sheen was a man of his time, but in my opinion, I think he was ahead of his time because we look at the 20th century, especially the period where his show Life is Worth Living really took off, which was roughly the period when the Cold War was happening. And of course, communism was Russia was, of course, ruling Eastern Europe with an iron fist, so to speak. And Fulton Sheen actually was one of the biggest critics of communism, and he was the leading voice against communism. And Fulton Sheen, like he wasn't just focused on, speaking out against communism, but he also spoke on many issues of the church. And he does have a cause for canonization, by the way, and he was supposed to be beatified back in December 2019, but there's a delay on it. But let's continue to pray that we'll finally be able to witness his beatification. I know for a fact that his canonization will happen during my lifetime. That's for sure. But he does have a heck of a lot of writings out there. And I think it's for the purpose of our foundation, we are going to discuss marriage. And there's actually a very good book out there called Three to Get Married. And we'll discuss why is that. And if there's a very famous quote, why it takes three to get married. And we'll discuss that in a moment. But Fulton Sheen, a fierce anti-communist, pro-life, pro-marriage, one man, one woman. And he was filled with so much wisdom that is echoing through the 21st century.
Yes, 100%. I agree with you. And he has written so many books. I would just recommend to anybody who's watching this podcast to please do learn more. Mickey and I wouldn't possibly be able to list out every single book that he's written, but I do have a great bio that I wanted to share with everyone. It's actually from Dynamic Catholic. So I am just going to go ahead and share that he was born in 1895 in El Paso, Illinois. He was ordained a Catholic priest. Excuse me, he was ordained in 19 excuse me for whatever reason. Oh, in on September 20th, 1919. His talents as preacher were first seen during his time at teaching at the Catholic University of America, and in 1926 he began broadcasting Lenten talks on radio stations in New York. He soon began a weekly talk on the Catholic Hour radio program where he spoke on a range of topics, including Mary, the Eucharist, communism, and more. He discussed the the relevance of the gospel in the day-to-day Catholic life, and he became a bishop on June 11th, 1951. He also began his television series called Life is Worth Living. That year, the most widely viewed religious show in the history of television. It was for this show that he won an Emmy for the most outstanding television personality in 1953. He was nominated for the same award again in 1954 and the Best Male Personality Continuing Performance in 1957. He appeared on the cover of Time magazine in April 14th, 1952. His influence to countless conversions to Catholicism. In 1966, he became the Bishop of Rochester, a position he resigned in 1969. He spent the remainder of his life preaching and writing, and he died on December 9th of 1979. Now that comes from Dynamic Catholic. Sorry, I couldn't find it right away when we first started the podcast. But if you go to that article, it's called Meet Bishop Fulton Sheen. And I think it's a beautiful article because it really enlightens us about the struggles that he went through too. Just like most saints, most of the saints, if you read their lives, they did have times of real struggle where they needed to pray, they needed to trust the Lord, and at times they were tempted to give up, right? And I don't think that he's any different than any of the other saints in that way. Mickey, I didn't know if you had any words of wisdom on that.
One of the things, and that we know, one of the things that every saint has in common is that they do have some kind of tribulations. But as we're reminded in the Gospel of John, in the world there's tribulations, but fear not, I've overcome them. And that was the case, whether it's Fulton Sheen, St. John Paul II. And by the way, prior to Fulton Sheen's death, St. John Paul the Great and Fulton Sheen actually met in the Vatican. It was, I believe, it was either before or after he was elected to the papacy that St. John Paul the Great would embrace Fulton Sheen and said, "Well done, you are the true son of the church." And I think that was so profound. And also, too, Fulton Sheen, one of the things that was key to his beautiful priesthood, and of course, he was elevated to being a bishop, is that he made a promise when he was ordained that he will spend daily before the Blessed Sacrament. And he did, kept true to that promise, even when he was sick, even during his final days, he still managed to be before the Blessed Sacrament for an hour. But when he was becoming popular, he actually would go for 3 hours. And honestly, that's a heck of a lot. That's a heck of a commitment for this outstanding, you know, um, you know, Catholic, Catholic clergyman in the United States. That it's just remarkable, and I think many people should really follow example because the key to his priestly ministry and to how he was able to give us so much wisdom was the Eucharist. There's no question in my mind he found solace through the Blessed Sacrament. He also found great wisdom. He also found times of peace when needed.
He's a real role model, isn't he, for not just priests and religious, but for all of us. He was such a dynamic personality. I mean, can you imagine that, in today's day and age, when we think of popular priests, we might think of someone like, say, Father Mike Schmitz or maybe Bishop Barron, who a lot of people know, and they are doing wonderful work, both of them. They're wonderful priests. Bishop Sheen was like them in that way that he was not only was he popular, but he was popular with people in the general, people who watched just regular TV, right? Not just people who were religious, who were looking for religious programming. There were a lot of people that watched that program in the 1950s that were really transformed. I mean, I know people personally who aren't even Catholic that used to watch that show and they learned so much about the Catholic faith. So anything that that people had questions about being Catholic, about the lives of the saints, about living a life of virtue came from Bishop Sheen in the 1950s, right? I mean, so isn't that amazing? He was definitely in the limelight, wasn't he? I mean, let's talk a little bit more about that because I can't even imagine what that would have been like at that time.
Well, and yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, too, like you have to keep in mind that in the 1950s, television was really a thing, you know, and Fulton Sheen, he was really dominating it. He beat out Milton Berle actually to win the Emmy, as you alluded to earlier in this episode. But let's face it, I mean, Fulton Sheen too, like, he was he was a critic of communism, as I alluded to earlier in this episode. And there was no question there were people that, despised him because there were, let's face it, there were Catholics that did support communism, and there are still some today. I'm not going to say who it is, by the way. So this is not the platform to do it, but but yeah, and that's part of the reason too. Like for Fulton Sheen, that when he was finishing his final years as bishop, particularly in Rochester and Rockton. Let's face it, if you think New York was liberal now, you should see how it was, back in the 60s and everything, especially where the sexual revolution was coming into play and when they were beginning to legalize abortion in their state. But the fact of the matter is too, like Sheen, he spoke time and time again, and even Rochester, gave him, you know, gave him, a bad, gave him a bad name and everything.
Wow, yes. I remember reading about his life some time ago, and that those times after that the TV show was no longer, on the air, and when he became the Bishop of Rochester, and then sort of toward the end of his life, he had moments that he felt like he was a failure. And it was through the Blessed Sacrament, it was through the prayer, it was through the time of solitude with the Lord, and even with his writing, this he was able to find solace. He was able to find peace after, really he really experienced so much in his life, didn't he? And also in that same article that I was reading from, which was from Dynamic Catholic, which is, of course, is Matthew Kelly, the author, which so many of you know, is that there's some great quotes on that article. One of them is that unless there's a Good Friday in your life, there can be no Easter Sunday. Another one is no matter who says what, you should accept it with a smile and do your own work. I think that that's an amazing one, isn't it? Because what he's trying to say is that basically that what we should do, almost the way Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta talks about that, is the power of the smile, the power of showing the love of God to others through our facial expressions, right? Through the joy that we can show others. So let's talk about that because I do feel that he was able to communicate that so well to others. What was really important in life, wasn't he?
He sure was, and I mean, as a matter of fact, I remember listening to some interviews actually of some of his family members, in particular his niece Joan Sheen Cunningham, who passed away recently. Joan actually have recalled times like, of course, she had a close friendship um, with the late with the Venerable Fulton Sheen, and there were also some family members too that actually were in, that actually had to call themselves in the religious or the priesthood actually, which is really extraordinary. And also too, you gotta keep in mind that, Fulton Sheen, he comes from a really big family too. I mean, of course, he's Irish, yet that, he had that, Midwestern, accent. Like, well, if you ever meet anybody in the Midwest, you don't really pick up an accent. Like, you're just thinking to yourself, wait a second, is this like, regular person, like, but yeah, like, and Fulton Sheen too, like, he's very quotable. You know, in fact, I'm in possession of one of his books where there's like a quote of a day from him. From Fulton Sheen. I'm only thinking to myself, oh, this is great. I think also too when it comes to our podcast, and I mentioned earlier about the book Three to Get Married, and if anyone here is listening, whether you're married, in a courtship or engaged, I strongly recommend you read Three to Get Married. I think that's a really good marriage prep for you, especially before you embark on your pre-Cana classes or you need a little boost or something. But one quote that really stands out to me from Fulton Sheen is that it takes three to make love, not two. You, your spouse, and God. Without God, people only succeed in bringing out the worst in one another.
Wow, that's a good one. And can I say that for our audience, this is our Families in Crisis podcast, right? And as you and I both know, Mickey, from working in the foundation, there's all kinds of crisis, right? It could be something to do with relationship issue. It could be something to do with divorce or separation. job loss, loss of a loved one, health crisis. I mean, sometimes people are even just worried about their kids. I mean, there's all kinds of things that would be constitute those adversities that families face. I think that Bishop Fulton Sheen did a wonderful job of addressing that, didn't he? He did a wonderful job of realizing that just because we're living in this life and get married, people who get married, it doesn't mean things are going to be perfect. We need to work at it, don't we? And I think he really was wonderful and great at teaching people how important it is to work at your marriage, as Mickey said, that it takes 3, not just 2. I just thought I would read a couple more of those quotes from the article from Dynamic Catholic. One of them is he says, if we become what we love, if we love what is base, we become base. But if we love what is noble, we become noble. Another one I thought was good, which I think it would be a good discussion point for both of us, is that moral principles do not depend on a majority vote. Wrong is wrong, even if everybody is wrong. Right is right, even if nobody is right. So isn't that just like today? I noticed that a lot of priests today, even my own pastor at my parish, he quotes Bishop Fulton Sheen a lot. And I think because a lot of what he said, there was such wisdom in some of those quotes and in all of the books that he wrote, and when he was obviously a TV host too.
Yes, and in fact, there's actually a quote that kind of stands out to me too, and in the retrospect of marriage. Fulton Sheen says one of the reasons why so many marriages are shipwrecked is because as the young couple leave the altar, they fail to realize that human feelings, tire, and the enthusiasm of the honeymoon is not the same as the more solid happiness of enduring human love. One of the greatest trials of marriage is the absence of solitude. In the first moments of human love, one does not see the little hidden deformities which later on appear.
No, that's a really good one too. And I would just suggest to anyone who's watching this podcast, I think these podcasts really what they are is they're an invitation for you, for me to learn more. We can never learn everything on a podcast, right? Because everything like there's a lot more reading, there's a lot more research, there's a lot more, ways that you can learn. So I just invite you to please do and to intercede to him because this is our Families in Crisis podcast. He would be the perfect person to intercede to. Now, before this podcast ends, we're also going to talk about him getting to the next level of sainthood. Right now he's at venerable. So he's not quite a full-fledged saint in the Catholic Church. So we do need to intercede so that the steps can be taken so that he will become a saint of our Catholic Church. Another quote that I have from him is that love burdens itself with the wants and woes and losses and even the wrongs of others. So think about that. So we can burden ourselves, he's saying, with those wants and losses, even the wrongs of others. Sometimes we worry too much about what's happened to us in the past. We worry too much about the sin that other people have committed against us. So I think that that's something to really think about when you think about Bishop Fulton Sheen. He also says that the proud man counts his newspaper clippings, the humble his blessings. Now remember, of course, newspapers aren't something that most people read anymore. Most people get their news on the internet, right? But he's saying that the proud man counts his newspaper clippings. So what he's referring to is like the pride of the fact that, oh, wow, I was displayed somehow in society or on the news of something that I did. But he's saying that really a humble person counts their blessings. And you can do that no matter what your circumstances in life, right? He talks so much about marriage and family, but I think he also covered a lot about crisis. Don't you think so, Mickey?
Oh, yes, I agree. Well, let's face it. I mean, Fulton Sheen, he was a well-rounded person, and you know, he kind of predicted like what the church and society was going to be today. You know, everything is happening right now. Like Fulton Sheen pretty much warned us. Let alone Saint John Paul the Great, even Pope Benedict XVI. Those three right there. I mean, I'm like thinking to myself, there should be a Mount Rushmore of you know, the Mount Rushmore, like I'm sorry, a Catholic Mount Rushmore. So you put Fulton Sheen there, you put St. John Paul the Great, Pope Benedict the 16th, and whoever else that could really that's like worthy of it. But the point being is that most of the stuff that we're seeing like today with marital crisis, abortion, the crisis within the church, Fulton Sheen has warned us about it. And I think now, I mean, honestly, I think I couldn't think of a better time to have him as a subject of our of our 10 Saints series. But now, I think as a perfect reminder, especially when it comes to the family and crisis they were navigating. And he is so, he's so, I kind of think I always thought he was a reservoir of wisdom for so many people, and he's inspired so many to answer that call. As a matter of fact, there is a book out. I'm the names escape me, but or someone once told me that the daughter of Joseph Stalin, who at the time led Russia, the Soviet Union, when they were ruling Europe with an iron fist, she defected and she was hiding in New York for a while. And then she finally decided that it was through the example of Fulton Sheen that she actually would convert to Catholicism. And the other thing too is that there's actually a book out in which Fulton and also Fulton Sheen too would actually expose a scandal in which there would be communist friendly Catholics that were infiltrating into the seminaries across the world, by the way. And he warned us about it. And eventually, I think most of those priests, repented of it. And I think they really saved their priesthood through Fulton Sheen. And you wonder why he got a lot of flack, especially from the Diocese of Rochester. And they still have that, I mean, I don't want to, spend the rest of the recording of it, but there's quite a bit of politics involved with why his beatification is being held up, which should have been done, if they weren't playing these games or whatever. But I mean, let's face it, there are still some Catholics who support communism, and one of the things they want to do is they want to hold up the beatification of Fulton Sheen. Now, I mean, I'm sure. Let's say we have the next pope, and maybe let's say a little more orthodox than the one we have now. Who knows? Could probably say, "All right, get your act together. Let's get this done." That kind of thing. And by the way, there was a pro-life miracle associated with Fulton Sheen that I'll discuss before we kind of wrap things up. Basically, what happened was, and there's a book out about 62 Seconds Dead, or I forget what the full title was, but we'll share it eventually. But basically, there's a baby actually named Fulton Sheen because of all this, and there was actually a baby that was originally supposed to be that was like stillborn, and when it was in the morgue, there was the medical examiner like died about an hour later. And the baby was alive, and like the medical examiner never had anything like this before. Her crying, the baby was alive, and the mom realized that it was through his intercession that the baby was alive today, and that actually paved the way for his beatification. Now, once everyone just be like, okay, let's just go forward with it, he would need one more miracle, and then he will be a saint. But I think in God's eye, he was. But I digress.
No, I appreciate you sharing. It's funny because I had that page up of the article where it talks about the baby and everything. So I appreciate you bringing that forth for everybody so that they can pray. Because you're right, he needs one more miracle in order to, be blessed and then be canonized. I wanted to, if I could just take a second here on that same article from the Dynamic Catholic on Bishop Sheen. It says that the third step in the process of canonization involves a miracle. This shows the Venerable's individual union and cooperation with God. The miracle can take place in any diocese, not just the diocese that initially opened the cause for canonization. If a miracle appears to have occurred, then significant research and investigation ensues to make sure that there's not a natural scientific reason this could have occurred. The vast majority of miracles are medical because these cases are typically well documented in terms of disease, treatment, and healing. The Congregation for the Causes of the Saints again thoroughly reviews the reported miracle, votes and passes it along to the Pope, who makes the ultimate decision. Upon approval, the individual is now known as blessed. So that would be his next step. A public beatification through veneration typically occurs in the diocese closely affiliated with the individual's life. Catholics are now able to privately venerate this individual. So keep praying. I just want to say that to everybody that's watching our podcast right now, because he's had the first miracle, which Mickey did talk about. And then this article says that the fourth and final step of the process is canonization, is essentially a repeat of the third. What I said, having another miracle with that second miracle. It's important that the papal declaration of sainthood is not what makes an individual a saint. The Pope simply declares that there is a sufficient evidence that the individual is in heaven with God and lived a life worthy of imitation by Catholics. I certainly think he is. I mean, I certainly think that Venerable Fulton Sheen is on his way. So I want to invite everybody who's watching, please do lift up prayers. I don't have a prayer prepared for you right here on this podcast, but I'm sure that there is a special prayer that you can find online. So, Mickey, did you have any final words before we're not quite there yet, but if as we're headed toward the end?
Sure. Well, and I actually just want to add something to you mentioned about the diocese closest to where the it's launched. So Fulton Sheen actually is from the Peoria Diocese in Illinois, and that's where he was ordained a priest. But when they were planning for his beatification before the holdup and everything, it was going to take place in Chicago. So it kind of makes sense. It's like I think about like an hour away or something like that. So they go by, I think, like maybe like the archdiocese in this case. So for this is for the beatification, by the way. Now, as far as the canonization is concerned, very likely it'll take place at the Vatican, unless there's like a special circumstance. Let me like circumstance. Maybe the Pope is making a pilgrimage to the United States, where where the call to canonization took place, and he could do it in Washington, or like if he happened on his itinerary, he's going to go to the diocese where this where the cause opened, and where he's going to formally close it and eventually put him in the communion of saints and everything. And if anyone's ever been to a ceremony where you had the where someone was being beatified or canonized, I think it's one of the most beautiful things you could ever witness. That would coincide with like say like the sun like the Sunday liturgy, so to speak. I mean, first off, if you could do it, do it. I mean, I have friends that remember seeing the canonization of Saint Teresa of Calcutta, and they told me it was very powerful. I had colleagues that told me about witnessing the beatification of Father Michael J. McGivney, the founder of the Knights of Columbus. I've also talked to people who saw the canonization of Saint Catherine Drexel, a very powerful saint for Philadelphia, of course. But I would say if I could give you three recommend recommended readings, well, I gave you one, three to get married. The other one is a Declaration of Dependence, and another one that I would definitely recommend that's written by Fulton Sheen is Go to Heaven or Get to Heaven, something along those lines. So read those, and also just Google search what he has written. Sophia Institute Press, they have some of his writings published, and Tan Books. They also have a 4 or 5 book set of some of his prolific writings that I highly recommend. And of course, add it to your growing Catholic library.
Yeah, so beautiful. I want to end by one of his wonderful quotes, and that quote is that you are infinitely precious because you are loved by God. And I want to say that to all of you, especially you who are watching, that you are in crisis. You have been affected by some type of adversity in your family. I want to let you know that we as a foundation are here for you. Mickey, I want to thank you so much for joining us as always.
And thank you for having me.
And I want to remind all of you to please do check out the resources at nonatus.org. We offer free pastoral consultations with a Mercedarian friar. They're the ones that founded us. Simply go to nonatus.org. Everything that we offer is free because we are our Catholic nonprofit 501c3. God bless, and we'll see you next month for our Families in Crisis podcast 10 Saint series. See you then. The St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith was founded in 2015 by the Mercedarian religious order with a mission to make pastoral outreach to families in crisis. The friars came together after attending the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia with hopes of creating a foundation which could help those families and individuals who have faced tough times and need to know that the Church cares and is there to help. Since that time when we were founded, the foundation has helped hundreds of families by offering prayer, priestly consultations, podcasts and videos, and programs and events. Whether it is something to do with divorce or separation, trauma, job loss, loss of a loved one, relationship issues, or other crisis, the foundation has seen lives transformed through the services we provide. Pope Francis has referred to our world as a field hospital, where there are a great deal of individuals and families who feel abandoned and they need the special outreach of those who truly care and wish to show the face of God to others. As a foundation, that is what we do every day, and we're grateful to people like you who help to make a difference for families in crisis. Please pray for us and for our mission. Would you consider a one-time or recurring gift? Please go to nonatus.org to donate. Thank you sincerely from all of us at the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith.